gives a fuck about an Oxford comma? By Great 78.
Who gives a fuck about an Oxford comma? I've seen those English dramas too. They're cruel. So if there's any other way to spell the word, it's fine with me. With me.
Chapter 10. Swallowed. Draco. The middle of August, 1999. Malfoy Manor, Wiltshire, England. Draco tried to fill his summer days productively, either reading or flying or studying Muggle culture. But the restless, Grangerless summer nights destroyed him. Gone were the cozy dormitory quips and revision sessions between himself and Granger. Pym was a good friend and could keep a decent conversation going, but Draco had a feeling he wouldn't look nearly as good in pink silk pajamas as Granger had. He tried going out in Muggle London to let loose with a few drinks in a club with a bunch of other nameless, faceless revellers. That had worked for a bit, for perhaps an hour or two at a time. But Scotch had the tendency to make him maudlin. The Muggle women he brought back to his family's London flat after nights out only smelled of vanilla or musk or cigarettes, never gardenias. And none of them had ever wanted to discuss the Catcher in the Rye with him. He thought about writing to Granger, and he picked up a quill at least a half-dozen times. But what was there to write? Are you still eating apples with Nutella? Do you have any more stupid books to recommend? Can you send me something that smells like you? I miss you. To ensure that he wouldn't do something entirely stupid, such as write any of that on parchment, and give it to his owl Thorn to be delivered to Granger, he snapped every quill he could find in the manor. October felt like a lifetime away. Early September 1999. Malfoy Manor, Wiltshire, England. When Theo stopped by for a visit and casually dropped the bomb on him that Granger had sent him a letter that summer, Draco nearly ripped the arms off of the wingback chair in which she was sitting. "Why the hell was she writing to you?" he snarled, with more than a hint of accusation in his voice. "Can't a witch write to an attractive wizard without arousing suspicion?" Theo asked, with a nonchalant smirk. "Shut the fuck up, Nott, and tell me what she said," Draco demanded. "Well, which one do you want me to do?" "What?" Theo huffed mockingly. "Do you want me to shut the fuck up, or do you want me to tell you what she said?" "Just tell me, wanker!" Draco was reaching the end of his patience. "Fine. Merlin, Draco, you really should learn to relax, mate. When's the last time you got laid?" He only now realized that he was on his feet, and had begun pacing the hearth-rug. "Theo, if you don't answer my question, I'm going to shove my wand so far up your—" All right! You need to lay off the coffee, Draco, I'm serious. Granger only wished to know if I'd heard from the accommodations office at Oxford about my quarters, as she had not. Draco took a deep breath in, exhaling it out slowly in relief. "Right. Good. And have you heard from them?" Theo looked at him as if he were daft. "Of course. Didn't you?" Draco shrugged. I really don't know. To be honest, my elf usually collects the post from Thorn and takes care of it all these days. I suppose he's gotten into the habit whilst I was at school. Pym?" There was a pop in the space between their chairs, and Pym bowed to them both. "How may Pym be of service, Master Draco?" "Did I hear from Oxford about my accommodations for next term?" "Yes, Master Draco. You will be staying in Peckwater at Christchurch, room 307. Ah, same as me. Excellent," Theo interjected, and Draco nodded. The elf went on. There was also a separate message about the strict rules and regulations that govern the schools. We got the idea. Thanks, Pym, that's all, Draco said as he sat back down in his chair, already bored. The elf bowed once more and popped away. You're lucky your elf is so helpful. If I ask Franklin to draw me a hot bath, at least half the time the water has icebergs in it. That's because Franklin hates you, mate. You used to pull out his ear hair when we were children, Draco explained. Theo smiled fondly. Yeah, those were happy days. Not so much for Franklin, though, I imagine, Draco drawled. So, Christchurch. That's good. Pretty sure that's where Abraxas went. My mother's father, Cygnus, as well. Do you suppose Granger got in there? He tried to say this with the utmost casualness. Theo merely smirked at him at his complete failure to do so. Theo scratched his chin thoughtfully. Who's to say? Possibly. Probably. I can't be certain, but I think it's been a year or two since anyone from Hogwarts got into Oxford. They might want to keep us magical folk all together. Draco narrowed his eyes at Theo thoughtfully, as the other boy conjured a mirror to study a strange spot on his chin. For not the first time, he wondered how much Theo knew about Draco's mission from Shacklebolt, to stay close to Granger whilst at Oxford. Is this a mole? Theo asked, pointing to a tiny speck near his lip. Just dirt, I think. Draco replied drolly. So, she hasn't heard anything from them? Didn't sound like it. Now, I've answered your question, you answer mine. When was the last time you got laid? Fuck not, why would I tell you that? Draco asked uncomfortably. Because you are wound up tighter than a Krupp chasing a Kneasel, and I cannot for the life of me figure out why. All I can assume is that you are in the midst of a dry spell. Draco rolled his eyes. Not, for your information. Though, to be honest, the couple of girls I've met have been rather lacking. Lacking what? I mean, you really only need one thing, if you catch my drift, and if you pet enough, it'll be wet enough. Salazar's ass, Theo. How do you manage to convince so many women that you're a nice bloke, when you're such a complete tosser? Draco asked earnestly. How do you have everyone fooled? What can I say? It's a gift. So, what are they lacking, these girls that you met? Who were they? Let me guess. Hannah Abbott. One of the Patils? Theo asked, still scratching at his spot. Theo, I'm not going to play guessing games with you. Draco bit out. Both of the Patils? Theo asked excitedly. I'm serious. Leave me alone. If you must know, they were muggles. Draco looked away uncomfortably. Theo was silent for several moments before speaking. Is this about Granger? Draco heaved a great sigh, trying to project an overall sense of being done with the entire subject. Why do you think everything is about Granger, Theo? He deadpanned, even though it most certainly was about her. I took you out last month to the hottest club in Wizarding Liverpool. I paid for bottle service and everything, which I should remind you is not cheap at that place. And yet you hardly spoke to anyone the entire night, in spite of the fact that a dozen witches stopped by to visit with us. And I happen to know for a fact that you didn't sleep with anyone for all of last year at school. Kept tabs on me, did you? Draco sneered. You're my oldest friend, Draco, and I vouched for you at your trial. I want you to succeed, mate. So yeah, I guess you could say that I'm keeping tabs, Thea replied, serious for once. And now, you tell me you've been slipping it to muggles, and you practically jumped down my throat at the mere mention of Granger. What gives? Is this just about that stupid contest we had, going on to see who gets the first sniff of that mudblood Draco was on his feet. hauling the other wizard up by his collar, his hawthorn wand threatening to impale Theo at the throat. He honestly could not even recall standing up and coming towards Theo, what with the roar of anger clouding out his senses. Say it. Come on, Nott. I dare you to say it. Say whatever filthy, vile shit you've got to say about Granger, so that my conscience is entirely clear when I crucio you. Go ahead. Theo only stared at him with wide eyes, the baby blue irises nearly swallowing up his pupils as his eyes narrowed in fear. The two wizards, faces only inches apart, stared into each other's eyes for several seconds in silence. Draco's breathing continued to be low and even as Theo held his own breath. All right, mate. I've got you. I understand." Theo swallowed hard, wincing a bit as the prick of Draco's wand impeded the track of his saliva. "I won't say anything like that again." Draco pulled his wand back slowly, the muscles in his arm nearly aching from the tight grip he'd maintained on the twig. Carefully, he released Theo's collar, his knuckles pressing firmly against the other wizard's sternum to push Theo back into his chair. Draco took 3 steps backwards until the backs of his knees touched his own chair. He sat slowly, his eyes never leaving Theo's. "So, you want to talk about this, mate?" the darker-haired Slytherin asked in a voice that strived for normalcy. Draco blinked, then folded his hands in his lap. He trained his eyes on his knuckles, which were still red from the grip he'd had around his friend's collar only moments before. "Talk about what?" he asked, a bit sullenly. Okay, a lot sullenly. Theo had struck a very raw nerve. "You and Granger!" Theo exclaimed. Then, "Wait, is there a you and Granger? Is that what the problem is? Have you been seeing her in secret this whole time, and you were too embarrassed about it to say anything?" "Of course not. Apparently she's much closer to you than to me, considering she wrote you a letter," Draco snapped. "That's true," Theo said speculatively. "Besides, what's there for me to be embarrassed about? If we were in a relationship, she would be the one involved with a convicted criminal." Theo was silent for a moment before nodding and agreeing. Right. But you do fancy her, is that right?" he asked, bewildered. Draco raised a brow at him. "You seem to have unexpressed thoughts on the matter, Nott. Out with it." Theo only sighed. "Just a bit surprised that you might actually be considering pursuing her. Seriously, is all. No offence, mate, but you and your family always struck me as the type that would stick to purebloods for marriages. Your father seems like he'd be the kind to perform an honor killing in the name of keeping his bloodline pure, or whatever." Draco gave a humorless bark of laughter. "Well, seeing as my father will be in Azkaban until he's nearly a century old, I feel like I'm safe from that, at least. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Even after we practically lived together for a year, Granger still seems to barely tolerate being in the same room with me for long stretches of time. Don't expect my owl to be delivering our wedding invitations anytime soon." It was Theo's turn to laugh without conviction. "Granger's letter and the bits from Oxford were the only post I've gotten in over a year, besides a few packages from my mother. Turns out, being outed as the son of both a half-blood and a Death-Eater all in the same year rather takes you off of the guest list for nearly every wizarding soiree there is, no matter who the host allegiances were with." Draco tried to school the look of pity on his face. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Don't be. I'm going to be fine. I just need to make a name for myself that isn't immediately followed with Tiberius Nott's son. You're right. And listen, next year will be a whole new world. Like I said back before our careers advice, perhaps it's time that we branch out and try new paths for ourselves," Draco encouraged. "Enough about all that," Theo said briskly, clearly ready to change the subject. "So, what's your plan with Granger?" "What do you mean?" Draco asked, confused. "My plan is the same as it was last year. Stay close to her, continue to be unfailingly polite, talk to her about her interests, and hope that eventually she stops seeing me as her childhood bully." "Mate, no offense, but that really didn't work for you," Theo chided. "How so? We breakfasted almost every morning together at school." "You lived in the same dormitory. You practically had to breakfast together, and the two of you seemed to butt heads over the breakfast table more times than not. So, what else have you got?" "We worked on a project together for 4 months." Theo dismissed this. "Which you were assigned by a professor. Is there anything else?" "And she let me put her to bed on New Year's Eve." "Did you kiss her?" "No, but—" "Did she pull you into bed with her?" "No," Draco answered, with less conviction. "Did she offer to suck your—" "Crucio is still on the table, not. Lest you forget it." "Draco, I'm just trying to help." Theo spread his hands in a gesture of mea culpa. He slumped down into his chair, realizing that Theo's point was accurate. None of it had really worked for him. For Salazar's sake, when Granger wrote to a fellow classmate, asking about school, it had not even occurred to her to send him a letter. Likely he'd never even crossed her mind. Draco sighed. "So, what course of action do you suggest?" Theo perked up. "Yes, you need a plan. Gods, finally something to do." "Right, so we know you tried gifts. That went badly because of your lack of conviction. You tried expressing interest in her books, and she tried to take your head off." "She is a little fastidious," Draco conceded. Theo smirked. "Exactly. And if I might remind you, she was involved with a certain wizard the entirety of last year. Presumably she's still with him." Draco gritted his teeth, an unwanted picture of the ginger-headed git attempting to snog Granger flashing into his brain. "What's your point, Theo?" "My point is, perhaps Granger has a type," Theo answered with a knowing grin. Draco's eyebrows drew together, lost. "You think her type is overly dense, sloppy paupers? What? Do you think I need to knock myself senseless, begin dressing in rags, and give away the entirety of my fortune? You're saying I should act more like Weasley?" "I mean, it did work for him. Granted, I wasn't in the room with him when he visited, but I have to assume that he managed to get her to ride his broomstick." With a lightning quickness, Draco shot a stinging jinx at one of Theo's kneecaps. "Ow! Fuck, Draco! He didn't need to do that. I'm just stating the truth. He came through the flue, and then he came through her flue," Theo said, rubbing his kneecap. Draco shot a second stinging jinx at the other kneecap. All right. I get the picture. That was my last one, I promise. Although, I'm pretty sure, considering how impoverished Weasley is, there's a great joke involving a Niffler in there as well." Draco raised his wand pointedly. "But I'll leave it unsaid." The other wizard finished hurriedly. "My point is simply that Weasley, for all of his perceived faults, managed to bed Granger. Perhaps this whole poncy, refined, old money aesthetic you have going on isn't doing anything for her." Draco frowned. He'd not thought of that, but the more he turned it over in his mind, the more it almost made sense. He had always strived to be as perfect as possible. Granger enjoyed fixing things, making things better. Draco had watched her read every essay she'd turned in, no fewer than 5 times. He recalled seeing her over the years, fixing Neville Longbottom's potions in classes, straightening Crumb's collar for him at the Yule Ball, helping Potter with his Triwizard Tournament tasks. Perhaps Granger had some deep-seated need to mend broken people, but he'd always been too put together to need it. Could he possibly act broken enough? "What should I do?" Draco asked, thoroughly lost. It went against everything in his nature to be as slovenly and ill-mannered as Ronald Weasley. But if that's what it took, if that's what she wanted, Draco would move heaven and earth to give it to her. Theo tilted his head, considering. "Well, when I think of Weasley, I have to assume that he lives in a state of completely squalorous mess. The man ate food like a dense pig, and he dressed as though he was blind in one eye." Draco shook his head vigorously. "I'm not dressing like an indigent wart, Theo. Cheap fabrics make my skin itch. I'll not—" "Fine, fine. Besides, I'm fairly certain it isn't the clothes she has objections to, although you could certainly loosen up in the fastidiousness department. She's got that covered. You need to let loose a bit. Leave your dishes lying around, maybe your laundry, that sort of thing." Draco nodded, slowly. "Right. I could do that. Now, how can I act differently from how I normally am? How does Weasley act towards her?" Theo screwed up his lips. "Well, to be honest, he sort of acted like a prick, didn't he?" Draco frowned and nodded. Theo was right. Weasley had ignored her, had avoided coming to visit, even when she wanted him to. He'd left early at every opportunity. Draco voiced these ideas to Theo, who nodded in agreement. Yes. And I didn't mention this earlier because I didn't realize it mattered to you, but I actually just saw Weasley a couple of weeks ago at the Leaky. He was drunk and surrounded by far too many admirers to see me, but I saw him with his tongue down the throat of another witch." Draco's grip tightened on his wand as he inhaled sharply. The other wizard raised his hands defensively. "Don't shoot the messenger, Drake. I'm just telling you what I saw. Perhaps you need to play a bit hard to get. Openly flirt with other girls. Show Granger exactly what she's missing out on. Make her believe she isn't important to you, like Weasley does, you know. Before you know it, she'll be crawling to you, on your hands and knees, begging you to be hers, I mean." Theo's eyes drifted out of focus, as though he was picturing this moment in his mind. Draco dropped his wand into his lap, and carded his fingers through his hair with a sigh. "I don't know, Theo. Do you really think I can do all this?" "No," Theo said. "I've literally watched you eat Scottish tablet with a knife and fork before. But if you can possibly forget some of those ridiculous etiquette lessons for a little while and act a bit more like that tosser, maybe Granger will give you a chance." Draco threw his head back in resignation. He had tried everything else he could think of. Theo had been right. His gifts had been well received, but ultimately a failure in accomplishing anything. Expressing an interest in Granger's books had earned him nothing more than a few quips and some stern admonishments concerning his penchant for eating whilst he read. Every attempt he'd made to show her how interested he was, looking at her as she entered the room, paying rapt attention as she spoke. None of these things had gotten him any closer to the witch. If he needed to act like a slovenly, untidy grub who treated women as his own personal playthings to attract Hermione Granger, so be it. After all, he reasoned, it wouldn't need to be forever. He would allow her to change him, to fix him. And once she was his, it would all be worth it. At this point, he would do nearly anything to get close to her. The end of September, 1999. Malfoy Manor, Wiltshire, England. A few weeks later, Pym woke him at 10 o'clock in the morning to tell him that Kingsley Shacklebolt was already seated in his conservatory, enjoying brunch and waiting for him. Draco stumbled out of bed and threw on yesterday's robes, not even asked to care that they were rumpled. If Shacklebolt couldn't bother to give him some advanced warning, he could very well accept Draco's appearance as it was. He might as well start practicing this untidy Weasleyness now. He entered the conservatory 3 minutes later to find not only the minister but his under-secretary, Percy Weasley. The appearance of such garish and offensively red hair was an unwelcome sight this early in the morning, thought Draco uncharitably. "Minister, a great pleasure. Give me a bit of advance notice next time, and I can be certain that my elves can prepare a better spread for us," Draco said with more than a bit of sarcasm, taking in the sumptuous offerings on the breakfast table in front of the men. "No matter, Malfoy, this is fine. Apologies for our sudden appearance. We had a cancellation in our schedule, and Mr. Weasley was kind enough to allow me a slight departure from our routine today," Shacklebolt said crisply, barely sparing Draco a glance, except to sneer slightly at the rumpled robes he wore. Draco turned and gave a curt nod to Percy. "Weasley," he said, by way of greeting. "Malfoy," Percy answered in return, studying the silver cream pitcher fastidiously. Draco took a seat and picked up the teapot, pouring himself a cup. He sat back expectantly, but for a man who apparently had a busy schedule to keep, Shacklebolt seemed in little hurry to talk. "The minister wishes to discuss a few of the finer points with you about what he asked of you previously," Percy Weasley began, "concerning Hermione Granger." "Of course. Do go on," Draco said neutrally. He was highly curious to find out what Shacklebolt had told this Weasley concerning his supposed assignment. Shacklebolt waded in. "Part of the work is perhaps done for us. Apparently the good Professor Slughorn made a slight error in his recommendation letter. We received word from the admissions office at Oxford that 3 of you have been admitted, but at the accommodations office it only lists 2 entries in the request for quarters. They were confirming that this was correct, so I had Mr. Weasley here tell them to keep it that way." Draco did the quick maths, realizing that both he and Theo had received accommodations letters. "So Granger has nowhere to live?" "On the contrary, she's going to live with you," Shacklebolt said smoothly. Draco laughed, then sobered. "Oh, you're serious? Do you truly think that Granger will agree to that?" "She'll have no choice," Weasley interjected. "We've changed the accommodations records in the Oxford system to indicate that there are no more vacancies." "Right. So I'll be in the same flat with her." "That should be interesting," he said, a smile playing about his lips as he remembered his last conversation with Theo. Hopefully, Granger was ready to experience living with the slobbish Ron Weasley, in the form of Draco Malfoy. Kingsley finished his bite of poached egg before speaking again. "There are a handful of 3-bedroom options for flats, but we actually think it's best if the 3 of you share a 2-bedroom instead." Draco scoffed. "How is that going to work? I have a feeling that Granger is not going to want to share with us at all, much less if she and I were to share a room." "You shan't be sharing a room, Pratt. She and my brother are practically engaged at this point," Percy snapped. Draco only lifted one eyebrow at the ponce. Clearly, the Weasley brothers weren't that close, if this one had the impression that Granger and the ginger troll were betrothed. Last he checked, fiancés typically visited more than 3 times a year, and usually invited their affianced over for the Christmas and Easter holidays. He turned back to the minister, ignoring the spectacled weasel. "So, what is your solution, Minister? Because I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but your godson, Theo, invites far too many women into his bed for him to share a room with me. I enjoy a good threesome as much as the next man, but not particularly with another bloke, if you catch my drift." Percy, the ponce, looked both properly scandalized and simultaneously intrigued, and Draco wondered if it was the idea of the threesome, or the idea of the threesome with two men, that had gotten him all hot and bothered. "I was thinking that you could simply sleep on the sofa in the living room," Shacklebolt replied. Draco gave him a hard stare. "And what, precisely, would that accomplish?" "Simply put, you could monitor Miss Granger's comings and goings, perhaps vet any visitors she might have." Draco noticed that the man conveniently left off any mention of shaping Granger's plans for the future in front of the Weasley wizard. "Are you serious?" Draco asked. "You truly expect me to go from living in an 84-room, fully staffed, multi-story manor home, where I have my own wing, to sleeping on a sofa because there aren't enough bedrooms, like I'm a common Weasley?" If possible, Percy got even redder in the face as he lifted half out of his seat. Draco was secretly impressed with the way that the Weasley family had the ability to flush with anger in a colour that clashed so horribly with their hair. Shacklebolt raised one hand towards the bespectacled weasel, even as he narrowed his eyes at Draco. "If it's privacy you want, Malfoy, I hear the solitary confinement cells at Azkaban offer plenty of it." Draco held his breath, and was quiet for a moment, before he asked quietly, "Is that some kind of threat?" "Not at all." Shacklebolt spread his hands in a gesture of openness. "You know as well as I do that the Minister for Magic cannot overturn a decision of the Wizengamot. However, if a new case with new evidence were introduced—" Draco was tight-lipped, not meeting the eye of either wizard. "What new evidence would that be, Minister? I seem to recall that Katie Bell's brush with death a few years ago was never fully investigated." Draco was sullenly silent for several seconds before answering, "That's fine. I have no problem sleeping on a sofa." "We thought you wouldn't. Now, it will be up to you to suggest this, of course," the minister said, tearing apart a croissant to spread with butter. "Of course," Draco replied superciliously. "Am I to assume that you would like a detailed report kept of Granger's comings and goings, and her visitors, Minister? Shall I submit my report daily or weekly to Under-Secretary Weasley here?" "Merlin, no. Your role, Malfoy, will simply be to offer some protection to Miss Granger, a buffer against the ills of the world, if you will." Shacklebolt's eyes slid to the Weasley wizard, and this confirmed it for Draco. The minister had not revealed the full scope of his plans to his assistant. Whatever this was, it wasn't an officially sanctioned, ministry-approved activity. Why, then, was Shacklebolt doing it? This brought up another question in his mind. "Why have you not asked Theo to do this?" The minister appeared to be choosing his words carefully. "Theo is a lot of things. Gregarious, outgoing. But his background is not ours. You and I are more alike than you realize, Malfoy." As he spoke, something on Weasley's person chimed, and the ginger wizard jumped slightly, distracted by the sound. He showed no indication that he'd even heard Shacklebolt's words. "Minister, your 11 o'clock begins in 4 minutes." Shacklebolt nodded and carefully placed his fork and knife diagonally at the edge of his plate. He extended a hand to Draco to shake. "Malfoy, thanks for the brunch. I'll be in touch." Weasley did not offer a hand to shake in parting, nor did Draco. The two ministry wizards pushed back their chairs to go, striding to the door just as Pym arrived to accompany them back to the flue parlour. As their footfalls died away in the corridor, Shacklebolt's words rattled in Draco's head. What had he meant when he said that Theo's background was not the same as his and Draco's? Exactly how were he and Shacklebolt more alike? All three men were Slytherins, all finished at Hogwarts. All three of their surnames appeared on the list of the Sacred 28. But where the Malfoy and Shacklebolt lines were entirely pure-blooded for several generations back, the Not line had been recently tainted by Theo's half-blood mother. Technically, Theo was a pure-blood, except in the eyes of the most absolute, staunchest blood purists. If that's all this was, just more blood purity nonsense, Draco felt doomed. He had just fought to throw off this nonsense in a sealed-off drawing room not so very far from this room. Only a year and a half ago, he had quite literally defied his relatives in order to help a half-blood, a muggle-born, and a blood traitor escape from the Dark Lord. Now, he was being asked to step back into that role, only in a different form. Granger was innocent in all of this. She truly believed that she and her side had defeated this evil a year ago. Now it was rearing its ugly head again, and from her own side, no less. And it would fall to Draco this time to save her. He was brought abruptly back to the Muggle book over which Granger had been so protective. Back when he'd read it, Draco had been mildly amused at the Holden bloke's misinterpretation of the Robert Burns poem. But now he suddenly understood the man's perspective completely. I keep picturing all of these little kids playing some game in this big field of rye and all. Thousands of little kids, and nobody's around. Nobody big, I mean, except me. And I'm standing on the edge of some crazy cliff. What I have to do, I have to catch everybody if they start to go over the cliff. I mean, if they're running and they don't look where they're going, I have to come out from somewhere and catch them. That's all I do, all day. I'd just be the catcher in the rye and all. I know it's crazy, but that's the only thing I'd really like to be. Draco would need to be that somebody, rushing towards Granger to stop her, to prevent her from running off the side of that cliff into the pit of vipers below. He would need to be the unseen, protective catcher in the rye. He sat there thinking through possibilities and worries for several minutes, long after the brunch had dried and congealed on the plates in front of him. Minister Shacklebolt had left him with a belly full of food and a mind full of questions. Thank you for listening to Who Gives a Fuck About an Oxford Comma by Great 78. If you enjoyed this story and would like to listen to more, please follow me on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts by searching for Silver and Copper. Or you can find me under Great 78 on Archive of Our Own.